I have the honor and privilege tonight to introduce my president, Miss Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez. And it really is a great honor and a privilege because Judy's not only my president, she's also a mentor. She's been a friend of mine for many, many years. We have been sisters in the struggle. And you know, as I was reflecting upon being here tonight, I think I'm really fortunate in my lifetime, and people have talked about it, to see the labor movement and the peace movement, you know, finally come together, right? So I think that Judy is an example of one of the folks that, because of her experience, you know, both as a nurse and as an advocate, and just as a human being that cares and is compassionate. Judy is a person that if you are in a fight, you want Judy on your side. Judy works tirelessly. She's been a nurse in the busiest emergency room in New York City at Montefiore Medical Center for over 30 years. And during that time, she's managed to raise a family, a great family, and she is a grandma too. She's managed to further her education, and she's managed to lead our union really into a new, she really managed to transform our union, which was not easy, folks. And she's going to talk a little bit about that. But again, I know Judy very well, and I know in our struggle, you know, our inspiration, our motivation, a lot of it came from organizations like this organization that we're celebrating tonight. So a little bit about Judy's history. She was an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War, but her approach was always to condemn the politicians and not the people that were actually involved in the conflict. She did work in GI coffee houses, and you know, at that time she was treating people with, we didn't call it PTSD then, and she was very young when she did that, but she was really horrified when she heard what people were going through and the stories they would share and how they felt about what their experience was like. She also treated vets as a nurse. She treated victims of torture after military coups in Latin America during the 70s, Chile, Argentina, and Brazil, and a host of other refugees from war, violence, torture, and trauma from really all over the world. And that really fit into who she was as a nurse, a healer, and as a conscientious social activist. She herself has lost family members and neighbors to the war in Vietnam and cared for other vets subsequently as a result of trauma sustained after the Gulf Wars. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up a great leader and a woman that I admire very much, Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez.
I don't know, I panicked when I saw the musicians. I figured it was like the Academy Awards. I'm going to talk too long and then they're going to start playing music, so I'll have to shut up. Those of you who know me know that's true. So it's such an honor for NYSNA. You know, it does take a village. I think that was beautiful what Pat says. You know, Pat was my partner in crime in changing our union. Jill is over here, Mary, Judith. We have our amazing people and other people who've supported us throughout the years to make those changes. So, like, full disclosure, our organization hasn't taken on the condemning the military per se at this point. Much of what we do is to construct a stage in which that conversation can take place in depth or at key moments. The elongation of the role of our union in addressing social justice issues is part of that pathway. I'm talking to friends here and supporters. We don't always talk to people who agree with us. That's the challenge, because we've got to win over the hearts and minds of people if we're going to change the world. But we're a new union. NYSNA has existed for 100 years, but what we call euphemistically the new NYSNA is only 7 years old. When a group of dedicated fighters, including Pat and myself and several others, took on a $35 million enterprise that was seething with corruption and opportunism. I won't say anything about other unions. Worse, we've had to spend a lot of energy deconstructing the organization. You can't imagine how difficult that is. We didn't inherit excited, boots-on-the-ground activists ready to, thrilled to start all over again. while some people did see our election as a positive turning point, many people were very miserable or cynical due to the history of poor representation. Also, we had to contend with a disgruntled old guard, which was intent on sowing discord and making mischief. And taking on progressive issues had to be handled in the context of providing decent representation for our members. You have to start where people are. So how do we get people to feel the union? We had to allow members to trust us, to feel invested in the union, to see it as a friend, as opposed to a dues-sucking opponent to their well-being, which is how they saw it, who was in bed with the boss. And this is the context that we had to deal with the broader social concerns. So let's talk about information. We've talked a lot about information tonight. Well, everybody can repeat the rhetoric that we all want world peace. Very few people have an idea of what that really looks like or how we even get there. The average person doesn't seek out multiple forms of information. Most people watch Fox TV or mainstream television. Some people who self-identify as liberals or fierce Dems, maybe look at CNN or CNBC. A tiny minority listen to public radio. An even smaller minority look to international sources for news or left sources of news. And then we have the social media, which is really a double-edged sword. I've heard members and community people tell me about every conspiracy theory that they've ever heard, and they swear it's a fact. Then there are those who say, I believe nothing. But of course they have opinions. I guess they think it comes from God or their brains or some place. But we're very excited about our millennials, and I'm glad to see you guys here. It's so important. We wonder, do people mimic their parents, or do they seek out other sources of information? But I think that the majority of this new generation does have the capacity to think much more critically than previous generations. On the downside, we have the advent of technology that's very individualized. So the collective and communal functioning has suffered. Access to information is as broad as the nearest cell tower, but our communality has been changed. People, we all have seeing everyone walking together and looking at their cell phones, or doing multiple multitasking. So the point is, information is not an objective term, and it probably never was. We produce a newsletter every month. We haven't done a survey, but I doubt most of our members really read it thoroughly. We have Facebook pages, we have closed Facebook pages, and we put a lot of information out there, but people really like talking about other things instead. And of course, inside the union, we have debates about everything. We're not a monolithic structure. But what binds us is our concerns about healthcare and nurses' role in the healthcare system and as workers within their institutions. So to educate members about any issue, we have to be sure to start from the points of unity and expand consciousness in that manner. What we say has to resonate. It has to make sense to people who have very divergent worldviews. We're a microcosm of the American people. So even if we use the term militarism or the military-industrial complex, I doubt most of our members will have any idea what we're talking about. And that's sad, but it's true. Those are the facts. So here are some of the factors that we need to consider in order to raise the bar about examining our military, war, and the government's role within it. Terror. Since 9/11 and subsequent attacks in Europe and elsewhere, even those opposed to intervention feel very strongly about national security. Our goal is to separate what the US does around the world with weapons sales, alliances, the manner in which our military is used, the places they go, how decisions are made, with what will, quote unquote, keep us safe. And the short answer to that is, unfortunately, the long answer. One thing I've learned is there are no shortcuts. So how does one begin to explain the role of the military in this country without reproducing a lot of history and intent? Who are the rulers? Who are not the rulers? And all kinds of other important contexts to the story. There's really no way to do that. Brings us to raising consciousness. We have to begin where people are at, as I said, and for us it starts with healthcare and what nurses do, who we are, what we share, how we feel. We can start with the humanitarian germ of who we are, the thing that our members do identify with. So reports from Doctors Without Borders or our disaster network, NYRN, I have some brochures back there, I'm a little advertising here, and I'm selling tickets to a fundraiser if you're interested. Doing that humanitarian work with our relief efforts do provide a pathway. Convincing right-wing rhetoric admonishes the public to care for our own before we care about anyone else. And while I think charity begins at home is a good adage, it doesn't exclude caring beyond the front door. So humanitarian relief and recovery work pulls at nurses' heartstrings. It brings out the best in people. It doesn't have to be soaked in nationalism. This is one pathway that we can pull people to be concerned about international human suffering. But we also have to look at our priorities. That's another way we can use to talk about this. Comparing the military budget with healthcare or education budgets are other roads to understanding. But this is also complicated because you have rhetoric that juxtaposes social services once again against national security. So if the US, we hear, if the US is obliterated by its enemies, well, what good is a sound educational system? What good is healthcare delivery? But we can follow that logic through with folks. We can focus on the now as opposed to the what is. I think that destroying the US is beyond being highly speculative. But for example, climate change is scientifically proven, and without a planet, then what do we do? Shouldn't that be a better issue? So, we try to make analogies to try to, to tear through people's false logic, what I would call false logic. Posters and graphs comparing military spending to social services, we've done that. Especially those services that serve everybody, that's a good eye-opener, and it offers an opportunity to engage about priorities. What about veterans? Discussing the way veterans are treated by the healthcare system and the government business complex is another way to discuss the realities of the military budget. The suicide rate among veterans is 22 a day. 22 veterans every day kill themselves in this country. And why do you think that is? The long-term damage done to young recruits reflects what I call a tri-level causality. 1, seeing and participating in the violence of war is heart-wrenching for anyone. But feeling good about truly liberating people from oppression, like in World War II, it offers a kind of reprieve from the guilt that's associated with killing and surviving. Today's military, on the other hand, doesn't get that feel-good takeaway. With exceptions of occasional tasks like building schools or bridges or providing health care, most military actions result in more problems, confusion, miscalculation, impulsivity, and chaos. So you don't get a feeling of being a liberator. And finally, coming home to what? Spouses and family are estranged, poor job prospects, disorientation, alienation, increasing depression, medication, self-medication, and a resulting sense of hopelessness. So where does the military money go? Since it's certainly not take care of soldiers or veterans, it's important to delineate how that money is spent. When people think military, they think soldiers, veterans, national security. The amount spent on weapons and materiel far outweigh the amount spent on soldiers and veteran support. So we have to talk about fear, reality, and perception. The perception of national security varies greatly among people, but it does have a personal component, preventing 9/11 events from recurring. But the fact is that the suspects in the 9/11 attacks all came from Saudi Arabia, which is obviously a key ally, and I know everybody's reading about the torture and murder of the journalist. So building a wall and our current immigration law that's proposed by the president would not keep people who are educated and moneyed out. So how do we engage in this process of transformation? As we develop into a progressive, socially conscious union, hopefully we're going to be able to tackle these issues and win members over to a more comprehensive understanding of the role of the military-industrial complex as it causes havoc and suffering around the world. Because nurses are committed to salvaging life and limb, and we can certainly understand that the death and destruction resulting from war and weapons are the most harmful actions known to humankind. The challenges progressive unions and community organizations face are predicated upon the fact that we're asking folks to go up against serious culture shock when we introduce these very radical thoughts. Once folks get woke, like we say, they have to make a choice. Are they going to do something about these new revelations? Or are they going to crawl under a rock and wish they never heard these things? Or will they become cynical and think that the challenges to make real changes are just too overwhelming? Some of us recognize that it's through the military of any government that repression can be supported and sustained. The multi-billion-dollar weapons industry and the economic and military hegemony of the US and the world today give political figures, such as we have in Washington, a free license to do and say whatever they wish with relative impunity. The so-called war of ideas that voters respond to, even with moneyed ultra-right campaigns, pale in the face of the real wars that occur around the world and the potential for weapons being turned against our own countrymen and countrywomen. On a personal note, I look forward to a moment in time where we're at a level of development as an organization that can usher in a more universal level of consciousness, based in widely felt humanitarian sentiment that motivates folks to consistently read between the lines. Because it's through questioning what we've been told, fed, and manipulated to believe by the very powerful forces who benefit from our ignorance and apathy that we can be open to new ideas and perspectives. And of course, find the willingness and courage to act upon these ideas and work with others to transform our cities, states, and nations, and our world into a much better place. Well, I want to thank all of you for the work that you do in being part of our powerful movement that one day will surely succeed. Thank you.